going to do a quick review. So right from the beginning with the abstract, I had problems. I didn't know about being literate, whether they were bringing home literacies or they were focusing on transferring that. I really wanted to know how they were going to explain the deeper learning and understanding. As I began to read, I was definitely going to be looking for a definition of culturally responsive teaching or pedagogy, as well as definitions of what it is to be literate and literacy. And also their ending on students of color. I mean, really, wouldn't this be any student that's different from the dominant culture? So if this is supposed to be helping, just like add to everything, because I think that if we only focus on one area of students that are usually marginalized, it starts to essentialize them, and that's not particularly helpful in giving them power. It just kind of simplifies it and takes it away. In terms of page 2, I appreciated how they started. But I felt like their definition of culturally relevant practices was pretty soft at this point, and I wasn't really convinced, even though their examples got better. I did appreciate their the validating by bringing in multiple perspectives. However, the Ladstone billing, which was great to see, is actually not listed in the Bibli, and they refer to it a couple times. And as they go on to talk about the lack of description of what successful engaging practices look like, I was just like, okay, so you're going to tell me what those are. I don't think they ever really got there. Also, I think about when they're talking about care in this area on page 3, I would think there's lots of different deconstructions on what care is. I haven't researched that, but that's something. Here I started focusing on my pink and yellow to highlight the different issues. The pink ones are things that really I don't feel they're doing a good job on, and they need to do more to convince me. Here, if they're talking about fails to show clear understanding of how these patterns emerge. If they had read Campano, I think Campano gives like really lovely ideas of both in class and he calls it like the second classroom, like the after school things. And so I think that really would help to give a better discourse and narrative to this beginning part had they actually read Campano. The characteristics, yeah, they didn't develop this. Then they said they're not going to focus on that. They're going to focus on the context-dependent nature of displays of content. And I think they did that, and I think if they had drilled down on that, as opposed to trying to give definitions of culturally responsive teaching, I think this would have been a much stronger article. Once again, like Campano and Delpit, when they're talking about what meaning, what discourse, what interactions develop a space, and what interactions take place when teachers value their students and the knowledge they bring. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see that, and I was just kind of like, I think those are kind of general teaching things. So I started to feel that I really wasn't following what the reader wanted me to understand. And really, this is where I started to get like you're essentializing students, like you're trying to drill it down to, a person of color is like this and has these issues. And I'm like, wouldn't it be, different for these different things based on like the region that people come from, the generation, their gender, won't these changes change over time? I mean, technology changes, it's an ongoing negotiation. And as I went to page 5, this first part reminded me of something that I read previously, negotiating the relevant and culturally relevant mathematics. And this is by Agneti. And really, it's talking about marginalized students without essentializing them. It's, making sure they still have that power of negotiating. And here they're talking about literacy, and finally, in the defining literacy practices, they're answering some of the questions that I had in that earlier part. And I kind of go along. By this time, I'm kind of like, I'm being too critical. And I'm like, okay, great, and focusing on funds of knowledge and talking about negotiation, which had come up for me. And they're still not questioning the teacher when they're talking about culturally relevant teaching. They're always focusing on the student, and I think that's a huge mistake here. In terms of the lads and billings, one of the previous kind of general articles I read, I was just connecting my own knowledge here to it. And I think the next page, when we start getting into the gaps, I'm like, okay, I'm rolling with it. And I'm kind of, yeah, I'm rolling with it. Yes, I agree. But here, need examples to provide a situated view, okay, when it's constructed. It seems like they're almost being defensive, right, about why we need to have like positive stories instead of cautionary stories. And I think, this is a bit naive, and it's kind of biased. Like they don't even see their own limitations. So, and here we have non-canonical, non-sanctioned, outside the regular class, and Campano. And here, to me, is where I'm just kind of like, so basically you want kind of a little litmus test of what will work in the class. And aren't canonical texts, by definition, favoring the dominant culture? So, so here on this page, this is page 9, this is where I really just kind of finally clued in to what I was having trouble with. And I kind of felt like I had identified that from these paragraphs here, that the author basically wanted to have a positivism research approach. I think that what they wanted to do, their inquiry aim was to explain, predict, and control. And we're talking about critical literacy here, so this is critical theory, so we should be critiquing, transforming, trying to provide restitution or emancipation, right, for the learners. And those are the types of things that I don't think are the aim of this particular writer. They don't see that as important. What they think is important is basically to have a workable practice that will work with people of color. And I find that incredibly limiting. And here, this work often falls short of how to do this. I mean, inquiry-based or project-based things, there's so many things out there. How can there not be enough? And it's clear, we lack clear examples, and then reinforce competent, worthwhile activities. Like, who is it supposed to be clear for? And I think that they talk about the different roles. What is also missing are the ways in which students position themselves and are positioned as contributors of shared discord and as a part of a community of learners. But I think a lot of different teaching methods and pedagogy talk about the role of the student if we're talking about student-centered learners. So I'm really curious to find out, is this supposed to be student-centered at all, or if it's still a teacher-centered? Because after reading the writing, I felt it was still very teacher-centered. As we go on, I kind of, just tried to listen and understand the story. I appreciate all the work that was done, all the details that were given. I feel I understand well what the classroom was like, but I felt there was no checking on out-of-class interactions when they were talking about, focusing on what the kids talked about in class. But to me, a lot of stuff goes on in the hallway outside of class that actually helps give a deeper meaning to the things that you're reading in class. Also, from each of the different readings that were given, I felt that the narrative that was covered was very focused and oriented on the text. I think the points that showed that the language of the students that was being covered were just kind of typical ways of talking. I didn't feel that it was necessarily something that wasn't any kind of different code switching that was going on, and just, helping kids to switch from, the playground to the classroom in terms of that. I don't think I have anything more that I'm going to say is until the very end. Their conclusion, I felt, was particularly soft. Yeah, so I wish I could remember. There was like a drama case study with a lot of how, like, the author did a great job about how really young students brought in their own cultures and helped to convey meaning. And I felt that that discussion was much more relevant than what I read here in terms of learning about these things. Sorry about all the page flipping. I should have made a little note. Here, conclusion. So it talks about what discussions look like. I think they did that here, yes. But when they talk about that, students, that their metaphors, extended explanations, questions, connections to life and other genres and ideas were expected, respected, and valued. I think it was kind of soft. I felt that their ideas were just reformulated into what was going on. And I still feel this is a bit too teacher-focused, not student-focused in terms of learning. And at the very end, it says their collective definition of what it meant to be literate. Maybe I didn't read closely enough. I missed it. And here at the very end, I felt it was a pretty soft end compared to the beginning and the accusations of these missing parts of CRT. So also in terms of the references, I made some notes about some of the things that I felt that were missing based on my own kind of biblio about CRT that I keep regularly because I reference often. Okay, thanks.